can I steal a moment of your time before this episode plays? Thanks so much for listening to Labours of Sports Coaching. The appetite I see for the blend of academic and practical coaching conversations happening on the show is nothing short of amazing, and I'm determined to make this show bigger and better. Now, to help with that mission, please can I ask that you follow and rate the show 5 stars wherever you're listening. This takes maybe 10 seconds and has a massive effect on increasing the show's visibility, and as a result of that, its potential for future growth, which ultimately will enhance your return as a committed listener. Also check out the show support links for anyone looking to offer that extra bit of backing. There's much more to come for Labours of Sports Coaching, and I thank you for joining and driving our new community. And with that, enjoy this episode. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with myself, Mark Carroll. In this episode I'm delighted to be joined by Mjøndalen head coach in Norway, Mr. Kevin Nicol. Kevin, it's absolutely brilliant to have you on the show. I'm just delighted to get a chance to speak to you about your newest bit of research and also your coaching journey to date. So firstly, how are you before we get cracking?
Good, Mark, yeah, very good. We've had a few days off through the international break over here. So today was the first day back in training, and the guys look good and look ready and full of energy to finish the season on the night.
Brilliant. If I can parallel having a break insofar as being a lecturer, as being a senior first team football manager, we're in the middle of a reading week
Okay.
at UWS, which gives you a breather, lets you think about what's ahead. So, but yeah, no, absolutely great. And do you know what? I mean, this episode's been a really good excuse for me to kind of get back in touch with my own sort of area of research. But I always say, and I say quite hesitant, I never would suggest that I'm any kind of expert in this space, because I think you need to live it in the context in which you research it. I think sometimes to really have a real sort of potent sort of lived understanding of just how well a framework represents the reality of what a coach has to do and where there's gaps, and I think that's why particularly I really loved reading your recent paper, and why I've been really interested to chat to you about it, because what you basically looked at, and we can kind of go and look exactly at the title, was it was a paper on coaches' provision of structure for players' competence development, perspectives for of pro soccer coaches and players in Norway. So maybe before we get into kind of discussing the paper as such, let's maybe focus on what your motivations were for kind of researching in this space. So why competence? Why in performance sport? Talk to me about that to start with.
Yeah, it was interesting, Mark. I was taking a master's at Stirling Uni, and through that, I think I gave my players and my former club Asker some sort of questionnaire type thing regarding the motivational climate. And what came up quite prominently was I was very structured as a coach and gave a lot of structure. So this I discussed with my supervisor, Justine Allen, at the time, and I thought this was a kind of negative thing, that maybe was over-controlling. But she suggested at that time it didn't have to be like that. Especially in teaching and maybe parenting to a certain extent as well. And obviously in sport, you need a certain type of structure in place, otherwise it's going to be chaotic and the team won't know what they're going to be doing. So I was quite structured, and I got more interested in it. Researched a little bit about researching football, and there was a lot of talk of a very controlled environment at times, very directive. So that got me interested in my own coaching style first and foremost. And what I discovered was, at the time, I was quite, authoritative, quite right to the point. I never gave so much options. So I would say, 4 or 5 years ago, I was a very, very controlling coach. Still works so to a certain degree. I think in football, coaches often are, especially at top level, more in that kind of era of being quite right to the point and making sure people do their job. But through more research and kind of the structured area in self-determination theory, I found that it's the way that structure is given that makes it effective or less effective. So I got really interested in my own type of coaching. I found out that there wasn't so much research, especially in high performance sport, regarding structure given. And I felt that in football coaching in particular, that's what we really do. We give a lot of information, a lot of feedback, a lot of guidance, a lot of direction. And certainly looking into motivation, climate, and self-determination theory, it certainly helped me as a coach be better and give more space for opinions, more appreciating each individual player. Certainly trying to be more positive in my feedback. So so that was the main motivation behind it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can kind of break that down. It's a great way to start a conversation, I suppose. Just, I mean, that was always, I think certainly, and it sounds like you're speaking to this as well. It's almost like when you start to learn words that help you categorise various aspects of your kind of interpersonal nature when you're involved in coaching. Even just understanding that new language, it helps more clearly connect things in your mind, I think, as you're reflecting, doesn't it? So you start to then differentiate what was being a autonomous supporter from what was, being more controlling to then, and then it's interesting as well, but once you become more comfortable with that, it almost moves from a sort of more a question on semantics and what the words mean to kind of what are the uses of these underpinning styles anyway? Because it's kind of like, it's not that it needs to be black and white and that controlling is bad. It's just that it's often quite situational based, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. But one of the first things I did was look into how I could give a little bit more autonomy. One of the things I did actually back in 2019 was I started to have tactical meetings where players would pick up their own input. I know it doesn't sound anything out of this world, but at first team level, I think it's a little bit different, especially a Scottish guy sitting down with the players and actually having a meeting on the Monday after the game on the Sunday or the Saturday, talking to them, okay, what do you think we should do this week? This is the way that the team we're going to play against at the weekend will play. What things would you guys like to work on? What things you think we should focus on? Have you got any ideas that could help us against this team? And it was an eye-opener for me because it felt really uncomfortable. Like I said, I was very much, right forward. My personality is quite as such. I like to take responsibility. I like to, give my opinion first and foremost, but just open up a little bit and let the players feel involved. Was a complete eye-opener for me. I think we went on a run of matches where we won 11 out of 13, and maybe it wasn't because of that, but just I know that the players really enjoyed it. Especially the guys that love football, love talking football, and love the detail. There is some players out there that we don't really enjoy this. They just want to be told what to do, and that's fair as well. I think especially the more experienced players in football just want to win. So, but it was, it really changed to be a coach, and now we do much more of these things. But I actually think in Norway, from a paper as well, that we wrote, I think we are quite open to these things. It is quite a teaching model of coaching over here. Through my experience in Scotland, maybe it has changed. I've not been back home for 19 years or so coaching. I was in the game. Hopefully it has changed because and I remember when I was playing late 90s, early 2000s, it was, it was a lot of fear-based stuff going on, and it wasn't very enjoyable for me. It was something that never worked for me. I think it worked for some. But that's one of my main motivations as a coach is to make players feel so they can express themselves, to make to help them get the best out of themselves. I think I regret maybe not producing as good as football as I could have as a player, and I was kind of fear-based rather than going out there and enjoying the game. So that's one of my main triggers as a coach, is to help these guys I work with then show everyone what they can do and express themselves.
And isn't it maybe quite correct that you mentioned about the sort of the culture in Norway and also sort of understanding what your players want? Because you mentioned that some players want the detail and stuff like this, and it is quite an individualised approach, isn't it? But I suppose where team managers have that challenge is how do you allow for individualisation while still trying to keep a certain level of collective coordination, and is that, I can just only imagine that you're wrestling with that reality every day. So I would, how does this self-determined approach to things, this sort of all the sort of buzzwords that we see insofar as like athlete owned and stuff like that, how does that meet performance sport? Because I always wonder, as soon as a player stands, I want to win, it's not that mastery and all these other aspects and ownership go out the window, but they do change it. I would imagine they must change in the way that you know that manifests.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think first and foremost in football, that's where your game model comes in, and that, you know, that structure there, that is the kind of blueprint for what we're going to do, you know. But within that, there must be a certain amount of creativity, a certain amount of freedom for the players to feel as though they can come with ideas within their role. And if you're very clear in the role as well, that helps them. I think in any team sport, there must be some sort of relational connection to make the team work well. And that's where, especially from a defensive point of view, I feel that the players can come with ideas, can come with things that can get the better of the opposition. But you're right, at times, and especially when things are not going well, we've had a tough season this year, that players are not very comfortable coming with opinions when it's going badly. And that's when they feel they need an extra bit of guidance, an extra bit of structure from the coach to lead the way, to show direction when it's going badly, to help them. So it kind of differs. It's kind of not like a continuum, a different scale. It depends on the context. Perhaps it depends on what country you're working in. You can imagine if you go towards Eastern Europe. I interviewed one of the players in the study. He had played in Poland, and he said it's completely different there. It was, you know, if the coach told you to jump, you have to jump. So I think it could be very country specific, context specific, and obviously it depends a little bit on how results are, how the group's feeling, and that's the great joy of being a head coach. You've got to kind of feel the situation, you know, and it's very easy to read books and about these things, but in each situation it's always different, so that's the most enjoyable thing with my work area.
Yeah, and as much as I suppose I would die in the hill in saying that sometimes I think as academics we could do better on trying to probably get across the flexibility that we intend behind our language, that sometimes doesn't always come across as easy for coaches to pick up and use in a way that gives them more coherency and doesn't actually just introduce further problems. That isn't always a bad thing either, but I think one of the things it does capture, and you actually said it earlier on, was around chaos, because again, that sort of is where detail and structure and commands, dare I say it, and control is really important, isn't it? Because I suppose one of the clearest distinctions we have between autonomy supportive is that it's supporting autonomy, it's not complete autonomy, it's not laissez-faire, because if you don't have that structure, it is chaos. They don't have directions, and we need that, don't we?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think I studied in the 1970s, I believe, actually, on parenting, and they actually said that a controlling parent is actually better than a parent that just means their kids still, you know, create chaos, obviously. So, yeah, I think it's, you know, structure must be there to help that autonomy for players to, you know, to make sure they work well together as a group, to make sure they know what their role is within the team. But obviously, I think if a coach can let the players have options, make them feel as though they can maybe try different things, that it's not like rigid and they're not treated like a robot, I think that makes, you know, motivation flourish and makes players enjoy themselves, and that's when players play well, when teams do well as well, that there's a certain amount of room for expression and options, because you can't do the same thing all the time and then it'll be easy to play against. So these two things, structure and autonomy, go hand in hand together, but obviously it's the way that the structure is given that determines whether it's good for a player or whether it's controlling and negative. So that is the key, is how you use your interpersonal style as a coach. And I believe involvement's got a big part to play as well, that, you know, that connection, that empathy, that appreciation of the individual. I think that goes a long way to making things flow much better.
Yeah, and we will get to that, because one of the things, and I suppose a wee bit of a prelude to this, is that what did interest me with your work was that there hasn't actually been, and this I think it's just a testament to your ideas and how you brought, I think, your lived experience into the work. Is that, and why I think it's benefits, and the fact it's informed by practice, is that you aren't trying to separate and see and kind of individually pick apart these different aspects of behaviour. It's like they're a collective whole. And we're going to chat about that, and I just wanted to come back actually to a previous point. We are going to get into, there's so much we can discuss, there's so many aspects and themes that come out of your work, but even, you know, what you'd mentioned just there, Kevin, about sometimes about, you know, meeting the needs of the situation and stuff, like, and there, whereas I even went across at research with parenting, there was actually there's a work bag, and I'm going to absolutely murder the pronunciation here. It was a French author, I'm sure, but it was Longyearbyen, and this was in 2001, and it was actually in archery, and they spoke a lot about how in moments during competition where the players or the individuals were in a good space and they were able to control things, and the coach felt they were capable in those moments of making their own decisions, then they allowed for it. But where maybe the competition was tighter, or indeed just because of time constraints, the coach had to be more directive. They didn't just, you know, leave their athletes in a state of, a state of chaos. That goes back to that word. They had to structure their environment, isn't it? And it's just that you got me thinking of that work straight away.
The point you made there, you know, and I think, for example, just say again, be 3-0, and you're coming at half time, and some coaches might think it's a good idea to ask the players what do you think. But from me, you're 3-0 down, if you ask the players that, you can have 10 different things flying about the room, and the players are not very happy. They're probably a little bit emotional, and things can get out of control. So I think it's very important that you're concrete, that you're right to the point, that you maybe give one or two things to focus on first and foremost that can help us, that can improve the second half. Thinking about solutions first, you know, there's no point in looking back at things done wrong, and then choose a way forward. And I think then as well, at half time or so far then, I think the mental side and the emotional side is probably even more important. You know, you've got to talk about character and what we stand for and pride and all these things, you know. But I think there's certain times and places where you have to be straight to the point in direction and structure, and there's no room for choice at that moment, especially in professional sport.
And like I think what you said there about like coming in at half time, and maybe the reason why you don't necessarily ask them for their opinion is, couldn't that be exactly the trigger for potentially arguments erupting? Because players then come in, they're all probably in a state of threat, they've been concerned about their own performance. You ask them what they should do, and that's when somebody says, oh, he should stop kicking the ball away, or he should stop losing the ball, and then it just becomes chaos, doesn't it? So you need to kind of control that. It's just interesting, and actually, and again, let's maybe kick off, start to talk about your work, but we'll still, just one of the things that you've done, Kevin, obviously, is you were exploring these tensions and how the coach navigated it both pre-game and then sort of mid-game and after-game, and that, I think that in itself is is a real contribution to the literature, and I think in terms of for us speakers, our listeners rather, who maybe are outside of the academic bubble and they're maybe just coaches, I think it's not compartmentalising things in a way that's trying to assume that we can separate, you know, the occasion from the moment, but in order to help coaches just cope under the pressures, and could there maybe be a utility to having compartmentalised conversations about when you should be autonomous supporter in managing these different stages of a match? Because I could imagine you go through so many different emotions pre-game to during the game, and so many different decision meetings that, I don't know, are they not unique moments, so they require maybe a bit of a sort of segregated thought process, maybe?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. I think you know, when I think I can't speak personally, that when I get involved in the game as well, if we're talking about during the game, and the more emotional I am, the less time I've got to think, to be autonomous supportive or think who we're going to say, and I think that's natural. I think watch a lot of football, and I think players, if you're on the sideline during the match, I don't think it's a time really to be going into too much discussion, long kind of points from the sideline. It's got to be direct, it's got to be concrete. I think before the match, through experience, the biggest mistake many coaches make is flooding the players with information. I think nowadays, with all the tactical trends, with all the social media stuff and how we're going to play the game, and many coaches thinking they've got to go through every single detail. I think that's one of the problems that's keeping the game slightly. Now we've got bigger coaching staffs, of course, we've got more assistants, we've got sports scientists, and I think players will start to get a little bit overloaded. And I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about, because I believe we're getting too far away from letting the players play. I think that we're giving them too much structure at times, trying to help them, saying in a good way, obviously, but you can only take in so much information. And we've got to trust our players a little bit more. And the more as coaches that we talk before the game or during the game even, then I think it shows maybe a little bit lack of trust, and maybe us as coaches being a little bit stressed, and players can pick up on that, rather than being very much to the point, showing trust, maybe even tell a little story, and the team talk perhaps that touches their emotion. I think all these things are very interesting things to talk about, because it's almost getting out of hand, I think, the amount of information the players have to take in.
And that was actually kind of, we will jump ahead, actually, I think it's a great point, because one of the findings that I actually wanted to chat to you about was that very topic, wasn't it, about how sometimes this need to relay information, it almost seems like an internal issue with the coach sometimes, because they want to be seen, because that was one of your findings. You found that coaches they feel they need to say some stuff, they need to say a lot of stuff in order to sort of portray confidence, and there's and I get that, but then like you were saying it, I mean, I know it's sometimes quite an arbitrary figure, but that whole idea that you can only kind of keep so many, I think it's like 4 or 5 bits of information in your working memory at one time, assuming that that's all of equal complexity, and assuming that your emotional state is it's conducive to be able to keep that information in your head. We know that if you're emotional, your ability to concentrate goes down. We have learning style differences. There's so many aspects to that and it's not always as simple as, well, if I feed them more, they'll remember more. It's if I feed them more, they'll remember nothing, isn't it? And it's like, trying to get to that.
And also the players that we interviewed did say that the best coaches they worked with were those coaches that were able to make the complex simple. So they had, the way of describing things, and they tended to use less words. They might only use 5 words for what other coach might use 15, 20. And I've made so many mistakes in the past, especially when I was younger, especially the bigger game. I would actually go on the training week. I'd be making sure that the team, we need to be tactically perfect. Our shape needs to look good. We need to know exactly how we're going to press. We need to, this needs to be perfect. And the players can feel off you. You can become a little bit more demanding, a little bit more stressful as a coach. And, I think nobody's perfect, of course, as a coach, but over time, experience really helps. Almost when it comes to the bigger match, you've just got to focus on less points. You've actually got to get more energy and fun in training. Maybe you've got to do less tactics because the players need their energy, their mental energy for the match. And all these little things are, it comes with experience. And I think players often feel the emotion of the coach, and that affects them a great deal. And that starts at the start of the training week, I feel, and towards the match.
And isn't that sort of time as well, in some sense, and it never comes out of anything other than good intent, but the time that a coach may then spend explaining something 2, 3 times, that's time in some sense then stolen away from perhaps more one-to-one talks or more opportunities to speak at a level that's more meaningful to players, because isn't it the reality that only so much of what you say is ever going to be exactly meaningful to, one player at a time, depending on their whole situation. It's completely different from the defender to the striker, sitting in that changing room.
And it's interesting today, I had a chat with a player, and it was an individual chat. I noticed recently his body language was a little bit down. He wasn't quite looking at me in my eye. I could find something, I could feel something wasn't quite right with him. And that's the most important thing to do today, over anything, over the training, the tactics. And it turned out he had some family problems back home. As I said to him, I wish he would have come to me about this and talked to me, but the players want to just not really bother me and stuff. But that little chat there made all the difference in the world. I think I seen a spring step after it. he went and done some extra finishing practice, and he was flying the gate, you know. So just I really think it's the most important thing. I think how you set up your environment around you, how you set the tone as a coach. I think it's fascinating, and we could talk about it for hours. You know, it can go on and on and on. It doesn't have to be theory based, of course, but many of the top coaches in the past knows these details. You know, I think Neil Ferdinand had a great story about his mother was sick in hospital. Alex Ferguson found out somehow. Neil never told him, and sent a bouquet of flowers to his mother in hospital. You know, just those little details, and what Fergie did, and how many friends he had in football around him, his connections, I think made all the difference. You know, how he managed that fantastic club, and it went a long way to the success of Man United.
Yeah, and let's maybe stick on that topic, because again, it's reminding me of one of your other quite prominent themes, and I suppose just for those that are listening, if I can give a very sort of whistle-stop tour of, and you correct me, Kevin, if some of this is wrong, but basically you had done some semi-structured interviews, doesn't matter, semi-structured, that's just silly language, but you done interviews with 5 coaches in Norway who are operating in the top league in Norway, and 3 for each of those coaches, 3 of the players each as well.
Yeah.
And then it was sort of like how you brought together the different themes that were coming out of that, and what we're kind of now working towards, and we'll kind of dot back and forward here as we want to chat through them, is that, you know, and I suppose again a very whistle stop tour way, and I don't actually think it's absolutely necessary for us to get into the whole theoretical structure and all that, because this is more of a let's see how the theory lives out in a sense in the real world. But we've been looking at this through a sort of self-determination theory perspective. You've looked at it in the sense of, as a coach offering autonomy, that sort of fancy word we described, to give opportunities where players perceive a sense of control over their behaviours. As the coach structuring the environment, that was quite a big player in your sort of work, in the way that you were looking at things, in the sense that players feel efficacious maybe, or they feel they have an opportunity to engage with that environment and achieve success. And then also as a coach, delivering on a sort of interpersonal involvement to the extent that players feel related to the coach. Now, what you're getting at there that I think I really want to lean into now is that it almost sounds, and I know this was one of the findings of your work, that it's like, in order to create maybe if it's a conversation or if it's a space where perhaps the player's ready to take on feedback and help allow you to structure the environment, you kind of need to gather their trust up. You can sort of have that relatedness. Is that the sense of what you're saying?
Players, when I interviewed the players, it came up so many times in interviews with the players that they felt the most important thing for them as a player was that the manager saw them, that appreciated them as an individual, that spoke to them, even if they weren't playing. They just wanted a little, oh, how are you? You know, and it's amazing. It's just a small little detail that makes all the difference. And, you know, I believe, and we believe that by giving that involvement, even if the players maybe weren't so motivated to do the structure, as long as they felt a connection and a care from the coach, they were willing to do it. They were willing to do what the coach had asked for them. And that goes to show that it doesn't always have to be things that the players, you know, want to do or feel motivated to do, or maybe have like volition to do themselves. But if they feel as though the coach comes from a place where they care about them, says in a manner that they appreciate them as an individual, maybe gives a rationale, then they're willing to, you know, run through brick walls for coaches that do that little bit extra and make them feel appreciated. So yeah, and I think you were quite deliberate in your writing, and I picked up on this as well. You spoke about that, like, for these sort of, and I know obviously with professional football players, we're talking about, there are certain things that you don't, kind of goes without saying, they are this is a wide point. Everyone's motivated. It's just that the quality of motivation and maybe the use of it at different times. But even the very fact of just they understand human psychology enough to see that where we value our relationships with people, we're going to be more disposed towards engaging in behaviours that further strengthen that bond. And a coach is, you are creating that connection, like you say, Kevin. If I'm that player, then I'm going to realise, well, not just out of it being my job, but out of respect for Kevin and how that's going to deepen our bond. Yeah. And not always in the most altruistic ways. Players want to start games. There's nothing wrong with accepting what players are, isn't there not? But that I can so see the strength of that, to then setting up
the conversations when you're trying to structure an environment, you're trying to give them direction, that it's more likely to stick, and that it's more helpful, and that they're more likely to repeat the behaviours that you're hoping to see. So is that true in terms of your experience?
I think, honestly, and as a player as well, I never felt I played a coach that gave me, a great deal of autonomy or anything. But the coaches that I related to, that I felt that they were involved in my career, that they wanted the best for me as an individual, I would do anything for. Honestly, I would do anything. So it's almost, especially, professional football, it's an environment where you're never 100% certain that you're going to start the next match. It's an environment where you get criticised very easily. It's very short-term contracts. I suppose it is quite an unsafe environment, you would say. But those coaches that were able to create a close connection with me, I felt much safer around. I felt a degree of psychological safety. I don't know. I don't think in football you can be completely psychological safe, that you feel, that this is fine. I feel I could say anything. I think it's an environment where you would never totally feel that, but I think you could argue that you could feel a degree of that with coaches that care for you more and are more involved in you as an individual.
And do you need to, it seems you're having these sort of conversations, because you mentioned about coaches that you felt they cared about your career. Like, how much do we need to peddle what the team goals are and the team ethos is, and so far? Like, could I always wonder, isn't a really strong way of gathering sort of energy from your players to do the things you want them to do? Isn't it sometimes at times not leaning away from the team the way that you're consciously thinking about it, but players care about themselves, and there's nothing wrong with leaning into that self-preservation, isn't it? Is that not quite important?
We've sold 3 of our best players in the last year and a half or so it's obviously affected the team. We've struggled to replace them. But that's one of the first things I say to players when I bring them to Mjøndalen. My job's to help you be better. And if you eventually be better than or grow out with this club and the way you play, then that's fantastic for me. And that's our goal as a coaching staff as well, to improve each individual. From that, the team should improve, obviously. But I think it's my responsibility as well as a head coach to create an environment where individuals get better. I think every club nowadays in football is looking to be a selling club to a certain degree, to balance the books, to bring money in. Every club's looking to implement academy players into their first team squad, into the team, and that's the way that you develop a football club. So I think it's an important fact for each head coach. Some coaches might say you don't get much time, just get sacked, so it's all about winning. I disagree with that. I'm very fortunate to work in a country where maybe it's less trigger happy. I've worked under a board just now that have been fantastic towards me. They've given me so much time. I've recognised it's a difficult situation that we're all in. It's a difficult job I have. But maybe that wouldn't happen in other clubs. So I think as well that other coaches have said in the past, it's really important that you work for a board that you feel, that I could trust as well, that I've got a connection to them, that I could speak to them. And that certainly makes a difference for my work. And what I was told when I got the job was as well that it's really important that we develop people, and that's a huge figure for me. It's a huge motivation that I help players get better. And I think if players see that you're looking to improve them, they'll always give you the benefit of the doubt. And I think that's important in football, that you've got the players group with you, and that keeps you in a job for maybe an extra period that you can't turn things around.
I think it's really important what you're saying there about just the fact that you appreciate what you are able to do based on your environment and the powers that have been given to you in that space. Because I always wonder, is there maybe I don't know if it's just a temptation within coach education and more widely, or something perhaps that comes from maybe the overly rigid sort of spokespeople of some sort of motivational theory or something sort of. There's a lot of interpersonal imperatives placed on coaches, and I think sometimes you need to be wary of giving advice too widely, because it's almost like really important to respect that each coach has to use that information in their own environment, and their own environment is completely unique in terms of the underlying pressures that they're facing, what they are able to do. You spoke about, unfortunately, like Norway seems like a country that's less trigger happy. other countries, other clubs, not even just, thinking about it in a sort of paint all thing, but other clubs can be entirely different. Coaching approach sometimes has to be entirely different. Not to suggest that maybe some coaches aren't missing a trick, and that maybe the best way in certain high pressure situations can be taking the things that are hard and challenging and less instinctual. That just depends on where the coach is in their space, their own development. But there are certain things, isn't there, that you need to have a license to do, to be able to lean in on. And there's also certain things as a coach, the same way players have sort of comfort levels that they sit back into when they need it. As a coach, you need to be armed with the capacity to delve back into more directive behaviours where you need it, not just for the players, for you. And it's an interesting, it's got me thinking a little bit about that.
But I think I was very directive after a match. Was it 4 or 5 matches ago? I was really disappointed by body language last 20 minutes. It looked as though we were a beating team before the end of the match. Last 20 minutes. And I was really strong with the group as a whole, really, because it wasn't just one or two. It was more of a collective kind of attitude that we had. I was really strong with the boys, but I had 2 or 3 guys coming up to me after that the next day and said that was absolutely brilliant yesterday. That's just what we needed. A little kick the backside, So but that's what coaching's all about. It's picking the moments. It's instinctual at times, I believe, and I do get things wrong, of course. Some get right, but obviously experience and playing the game as well has helped a great deal. But it's not the be all and end all. I still think you can be a really good coach without playing the game. You can still pick up on these things. And I think being authentic and being yourself is maybe the best bit of advice you can get. I'm still quite a strong type coach, but learning about the motivational climate, learning about autonomy supportive coaching has really helped me, because it's helped me balance my style a little touch, So it's been a huge positive for me. And I've still got that competitive instinct, that will to win, but much more thoughtful and more aware about my interpersonal coaching style, as you could say. So it's really helped me a great deal.
And see the fact, Kevin, that like you said, sometimes we need to give players a bit of a jab, and there's times you need to give them a bit of cuddle as well. But is that because you're never just coaching an individual game? You're coaching the second game, the third game, the fourth game, even when you're in the first. Because I would wonder, what role does that play? Because one of the words that kind of jumped out to me in your work, and maybe this might be a wee bit of a segue onto it, was talking about this idea of you're not just trying to structure an environment for an individual performance, but also like team coordination. Now that isn't something that happens in a single week. Therefore, as you're trying to help them perform in game one, you're also trying to, and as part of providing wider structure across the next set of games, you need to also, I'd imagine, put messages in there for that reason too.
Yeah, and we've had a great success story in Norway. Bodø/Glimt as a team that's won the league over here several times in the last few years. Unbelievable achievement what they've done. But their team coordination, their playing style has been everything for them. They are so task oriented, so task focused. They don't even care about winning football matches, really. They just care about repeating those actions week to week. And they've found amazing results for it. And it's a big thing over here. The players are huge on team coordination, huge on clear role demands for each player, how we relate to each other. And
now, is that word means? I was trying to ask, what does that mean? Is that
team coordination? Yeah, is how a team manages to play together, basically how they relate. How successful they are as working together. That is team coordination. Obviously, structure plays a huge part in that. The information given before a match, guidance during it, and the feedback after it. But like you say, the feedback after a match, you're always thinking about how we're going to improve this team, because at the end of the day, it's all about the process. If we stick every day to what we believe in, if we don't go away from things and be, how can I say it, maybe a little bit emotional in how we work as coaching staff, chopping and changing here and there. As soon as you chop and change the coaching staff, players feel insecure, uncomfortable. They don't know exactly what they're going to do in each situation. They have to start again the whole time on the process. And then it obviously takes a longer period to get a team working well if you're chopping and changing. And that's why we've suffered some injuries at the start of this season and also last season. Once you get injuries, it's very, very hard to get rhythm and continuity in a football team. And it really affects that team coordination. And at times, if you've not got the right players to play, maybe your normal system, just say it's a 4-4-2, then you might have to adapt that system to suit the players that you have. So managing to keep a squad injury-free is a huge thing regarding team coordination. And then you could gradually develop that playing style bit by bit, maybe add a little bit extra here and there. Because like you said earlier, it's very difficult for players to take in so much information at one time. So it's a week-to-week process that you're developing this team.
And is that why then, so if you consider all this sort of how dynamic football is and how many things can just, are so difficult to predict, is that why there seemed to be quite a lot of attention, and I think that's what you're now coming across, because certainly when I was reading your work now and from hearing you that one of the findings that came out was it seemed to be that, and it seems from listening to you that it's like players rely a lot therefore on like there not being any last minute changes. Sometimes the tactical planning on a match day is that like an anchor point. So if we're talking about how we can give players a sense of structure and competence, can you speak to that a little bit more? Ask what are you caring about?
The most thing that I think creates a kind of incompetence feeling in players and insecurity is when they do not feel exactly, they do not know exactly what the coach wants, or if the coach changes from week to week, different opinions. For example, okay, you can change the strategy from match to match. Maybe one match you press high, one match you press low. But I think over times, most successful teams I've seen are the ones that are very consistent in their approach. Maybe it doesn't work out in the first season. Maybe it doesn't work out in the second season. Maybe they finish mid-table. But over time, they stick to what they do. They believe in it. They're very process-oriented. And over time, success comes. And I think Obos Ligaen over here has been a prime example. When Ronnie Dyler was at Strømsgodset, another club before he went to Celtic, was another example that they were very much focused on the process. And, players as well, when they train week, they feel if they're not practicing on the playing style or the principles each team has, they feel they're just like training for the sake of it. Maybe they just come in, maybe they just do a passing exercise, a little bit of possession, and they play a normal game at the end. That for them is not working on, first of all, the role, and as an individual, they're really motivated to get better in their role. They want to relate to people around them in their role as well, so they can improve. And they want to work on a playing style. They feel that's what gives them a sense of competence, that they don't have to think too much going into the game. They've got clear demands. They can just let the instinct take over. And we all know that to play well at any sport or to get a kind of sense of flow of what you're doing, you need to be challenged, obviously, to a certain degree, but you need to clear in your head that you've got, a clear way of playing and a clear role that you can flourish in.
Well, kind of perfect sort of, I don't know if it's like a barometer for knowing if you're heading in the right direction, because when you say that, if you just straight away and tell me if this is the correct quote maybe that I'm bringing up, because I think one of the things one of the players described is I've been at clubs and I've felt week after week that we've been training, not practicing. Yeah. Is that difference? Because
exactly,
that's a real interesting insight into how players can feel if they just feel like they're going through the motions and they're just at a fitness camp to week versus actually, I don't know. I could imagine you'll be able to tell me far better than I can listen myself. But you want to help sort of spur meaning to the players, I'd imagine, and get them to get behind something and understand something. So if there isn't evidence of artifacts in their environment throughout the league for what you're trying to then tell them they need to do in the match day, it's quite a challenge, isn't it? So
I spoke to another player from one club. He'd been there for 5 years, and he said he learned nothing new in 5 years until this new coaching staff came in. And he said he was actually going home thinking, wow, that was interesting, that was a good training session, and he couldn't wait to come in the next day to be better. He was so motivated to learn from his coaches and really happy how they were playing, focused on getting better every day. And it's amazing, for 5 years, he basically learned nothing from being an 18-year-old to when he was 23. So it just shows that the coaching style and how the coaches are more maybe developmental oriented can really trigger a sense of motivation in players group and a sense of enjoyment as well.
And sticking to this sort of pre-game then, is there a certain ratio that you try and stick to, or that you feel is helpful anyway for you personally, or from maybe other people you've interacted with, perhaps even thinking now and I know we're kind of merging your thoughts with the participants and your research, but it's just interesting. Is there any sort of ratio you would stick with insofar as like team instructions to individual sort of role expectations? What is there a magic number we need to hit to relate to, or is it depending on other variables? Because you mentioned things around like the footballer brain and stuff like that in your work as well, and how does that shape the structure you provide in the way that you provide?
Very interesting question. I think it should be directed towards each individual differently. I think there's some players that love detail, and you get to know them as a coach. What guys love to, think in depth, and they love little bits here and there. They might like to look at video clips of their direct opponent in the match, how they play. And there's other players that you just have to let be. And I think the more you give them, the worse they play. So I think football players, some of them are not the most, I don't think they can take in so much information. They might maybe not the brightest people in the world without being negative towards them. But I think you've got to be very careful with giving too much information. Like I've said, I don't think there's an exact ratio. I think the younger the team that you have, the more they desire structure. So the more that they want to know exactly what to do in each phase of the game. And this is the disadvantage of academy football now, where it's almost that young players are treated like robots. Everyone's almost got the same playing style. They've got an exact way of playing for each phase of the game. And they're used to doing the same thing all the time. When they come up to the first team football, then it's a little bit different. Then things are more complex. The formation might change now and then, just depending on the players we have. And it's making coaches' jobs maybe a little bit more difficult because through the academy phase, they've been told exactly what to do in each phase, So I think we need to be careful as coaches that coach youth players that we manage to let them come with opinion more, let them think more for themselves. So because I think we're missing the street footballer now. We miss the Wayne Rooney types, we miss the football intelligent players who learn the game on the street, playing with their friends, could instinctually feel something. They couldn't describe it, they couldn't really talk to you about it, how they see it, but they just feel football, they know it deep within them. But now supposedly the coach has got all the answers now. And I think that's the wrong way to go about things, We miss that kind of maverick in Scotland as well. I think we've got a hard-working national team. I don't see much Premier League in Scotland, but I watch the national team play. Very hard-working, well-organised. But we miss, one or two players that can do a little bit extra. The little bit, genius that we had in the past with the wingers in the olden days and the top players that we had playing Nightland, So it's become very straightforward, very kind of rigid and not very creative.
Yeah, and what I think you speak to there, and it completely resonates with me, just because I think there's like a line we can break down there, and it's really interesting. We're now kind of getting it, but I know to digress just very momentarily about this sort of now learning at youth football, but this is really, really important. And I can imagine what better person sometimes, and I know it sounds a bit strange to say, but you, as a senior manager, you see the outcome, and for trying to reverse engineer these things, we need players to be taught in such a way that perhaps when they get to, because I mean, it's where not you even think that youth coaching is this. I don't know if coaching is more something you do where people have established skills. Maybe that's a senior thing. I don't know if you teach the game at youth. Sometimes there's semantics in that, but I would think that just there's two things that you touch on there is about players. Some players want to know mechanics of things, and some players just want to know what the goal is, and they organise themselves towards that goal, and it's more implicit. It's less conscious, and sometimes I think that helps. And it is, I mean, there is a bit of stellar theory behind that, like our bodies and our brains sometimes like to do things in autopilot. But it's interesting, and the reason why I think this is really interesting, because there's also a connection that I see between that sort of viewpoint and sort of the fact that you do attach a bit of importance to the tactical aspect, and I know that's contextualised somewhat towards in a senior football and event. It's very tactical, but do you think that there is, if we're trying to reverse engineer and create these players that are going to be brilliant when they get to senior level, is the worry not then that we perhaps we perhaps make the mistake of reproducing knowledge. So like if we only ever tell players to do this and do that, and and even particularly at youth level where it's expecting them to exist within quite rigid structures, there's almost a question there of how does creativity, how does modern football actually flourish if it's always in a pre-designed system that, to be honest, and I'm not going to slag like Pep Guardiola off, but there's been that conversation about since positionalism came into the modern game. What is that changed?
But the thing is, do you know that Pep often signs players that are very relational? Jack Grealish and Aston Villa, for example.
Yeah.
And he turns them into his way of playing. But to be as good as Jack Grealish,
you need to have went in a different way.
You need to, because if you grow up playing Pep's football, maybe you're not going to be that good. Because you need to shoot more from distance. You need to try and take players on more. You need to maybe lose the ball in bad areas to learn. So it's a really interesting discussion.
And is that sort of like almost then recognising that what a developmental football player needs is a whole other game sometimes, even tactically, because you can get the rest tidied up at a later stage. But that because I know that it's more prominent now in like South America. There's a more relational type play for people. And for those maybe that are listening that haven't been quite as aware of that term, it's like players sort of leaning into the situation at the time and coordinating their movement. That kind of word that I think was more implicit.
When I played the game, we got told what formation we're playing, but we just went out and played. And I loved connecting with people. I loved little round the corner passes, little wall passes, little step overs, hit the highest point, get the ball back. But we never had names for these things back then either, Graham Souness has got a great story at Liverpool when he signed £1 million or something back then. I don't know how much it was. It probably wasn't as much as that, but it was a lot of money at the time. I think it was from Middlesbrough or Tottenham, I can't remember. But he goes up to the coach, Liverpool coach, Joe Fagan or something, before the game and asks, you want to tell him what to do? How shall I play? He was like, no, we paid all this money for you. We expect you to play them, just go out there. But maybe I'm contradicting myself a little bit because structure obviously is super important nowadays. It helps a team be coordinated, a player know exactly what to do. But I think we're over-structuring at times at a young age. So the creativity and the kind of feel for the game and the connecting and all these little things have kind of grown out the game a little bit now. And every player is very similar. We produce, in Norway as well, produce a lot of midfield players, possession type players. There's a lot of possession going on. There's a lot of artificial grass. There's not many grass pitches over here, which kind of makes all the football played to feet a little bit and all very much short passing game. I miss watching players like Paul Scholes ping a ball for 70 metres, Steven Gerrard doing the same, Frank Lampard shooting from 25 metres. I miss these players now. It's all very much towards Man City that have completely, they are world class, they are the best. But that style of football for me nowadays is getting a bit boring to watch. I very rarely watch Premier League in England now. I just feel a little bit, so like less risk involved, and it's starting to get a little bit boring for me. Like from a real football heart and a passion for the game.
And is it maybe is one of the problems with this is that it very quickly, and I'm probably doing the same thing and perpetuating this, but it becomes like an all or nothing. You're either fully positional or just quite more relational. And I suppose it's not to suggest that a relational type way of allowing players to lean into the moment and to lean into feel is to go against the importance of the structure that a positional thing, a positional tactical plan provides. And which is one of the things I see that sort of nuance in one of your findings where you did speak about the difference. Now we initially spoke about the importance of involvement, interpersonal involvement, relatedness, underpinning structure. This is now coming out of the other finding that was in your work where the coaches spoke about autonomy within structure and again the conditions for that, and it was this idea of the acumen of the player, because it's not easy to actually play in a sort of field-based way. If you're brought up, perhaps it's more natural. But you have to get that right, don't you, for every player? So
usually, Mark, the better the football player and the smarter the football player, the easier it is for this to happen. Because they can relate people, they can see things quicker, they can, they've just got that intelligence as a football player. And you could maybe let them have a little bit more freedom as such regarding their ability. There was one coach I spoke to who had a fantastic team. They won the Norwegian Championship, and many people thought he was a tactical genius. So, and he just laughed about this. He said that he was so lucky to recruit the right players for that system they had, that everything just clicked. He said to me, I could just let them go out and play. As long as, we trained well, everything just clicked. Perfection, he said. And it's interesting, he came back to the same club when I interviewed him, and he found it really difficult. He had a lot of young players, and, he told me, Kevin, that they just want to be told what to do constantly. And I miss the players that could just make things happen by, a little bit of eye contact, have a little bit of creativity, and offensive player especially. I do believe defensively each team must be quite structured, the defensive. You've got to have a certain type of rigid structure to stop the team playing through you. But from an offensive point of view, there must be an element of surprise to be a good offensive team. I think over time, people will figure you out if you do the same thing all the time. So this is where that kind of relational type play comes into it. And I do believe people will argue that, Pep Guardiola is very much positionalism. But I think when I watch them play, there is a certain amount of relational aspects going on. And like you say, it's a balance thing, isn't it? It's always a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
And it's up to each coach. Maybe, looking back at this season, maybe I've given, from an offensive point of view, maybe a little bit too much freedom. Maybe we've not been effective enough. That's learning from me. Maybe I should have just been more to the point that we just get the ball in the box, for example. That maybe could have created more chances for us. It's often down to ability. I think the better players you have, the more leeway you can give them in terms of how you're going to play the game, and the more good results you will get from that.
Yeah, and you mentioned, so there's a couple of things. Obviously, we started with mentioning about football and intelligence, but that was a finding of your work that sometimes determined how much autonomy was provided within that structure. You then also kind of commented on, I don't know if it might be like the tactical moments of the game, so more offensively, that's where autonomy perhaps is also somewhere that players, and it's perhaps somewhere where players, we're talking about what players are familiar with. Players are probably more familiar with being given creativity and attack, but if you then said to a team defensively, coordinate things and just, that's a bit more difficult, and I suppose you don't really have the luxury of within reason you might, but not every coach has the luxury of being able to get players towards that horizon of being comfortable with autonomy, so you need to sometimes just direct them at time. I wonder, does positioning in the team, does that have any, was that shown in your work to have any impact, or from your experience, can that also have an impact on how much autonomy is given to players? Can a left back be given different autonomy to what a centre mid? How does that kind of work? Or is it as easy as that? Is it still, it depends on the player and we need to see what structure is to them? I think a more offensive, players, that's why often young players, if they're a winger or a striker, they're more likely to get an opportunity, just because it doesn't cost as much if they make mistakes, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
So, young players, when they're offensive players, they're often pushed in the team a little bit earlier than a central defender or a goalkeeper, for example. And I think when you are a defender or a central defender, there's not so much freedom in how you're going to play out from the back. You can't take huge amount of risks unnecessarily. So, and I think as well that everyone understands the type of freedom I'm talking about. I don't think people expect a professional footballer just to do what they want out there. It's never going to happen. And every football player, like you've said earlier, wants to do well for the team, and the supporters and the manager and everything. So it's not in their wildest dreams to suddenly do what they want. It's never the case. It's not been my experience anyway. But I think players feel a little bit tight and a little bit rigid. They don't play so well if the coach is always on top of them and telling them exactly what to do in each situation. I think, and that's another thing as well. I think, coaches, certainly if you're a positive coach and you like offensive football, I think you've got to coach the decision made over the natural result of the decision. For example, a player can make a really, you can make a bad pass, but if that pass is looking for a positive movement in behind the attack, defensive opposition, then they would say, well done, it's a good effort. But sometimes, a pass that connects might, for example, if somebody's on the far side in a 1v1 situation, no great advantage. And if the ball switched to them when you had a 4v3 on the side of the ball then there's no point in making that switch of play because you've actually got one extra player on the side of the ball. So I think players really appreciate coaches that can see that and are very, very, not, I wouldn't say hard, but they're always focusing on the playing style and improving things. It's more of an improving mindset of coach.
It's more optimistic as well, isn't it? Because that was another finding that came out from the coaches saying, like, sort of like praise the intent, not the execution, and the players seem to value that. And is that because it sort of allows them to feel, I know, like in some sense, a sense of competence and your sense of confidence, they're kind of one and the same. So you're kind of need to players, I think, as you're developing their sense of how good they are, you need to keep them feeling like they're actually doing good things as well. So it seems like a much more optimistic feedback look to have, where is the intent correct? Is the intent correct longer term? That's you're on the right path. The execution, but then there's the tension. Obviously, it happens all the time. The execution,
again, it comes back to a sense of safety and trust between the player and the coach, and it's so important. Again, when it's all about winning and losing at the highest level, the player needs to feel. They might get criticised by the fans for giving the ball away, but if you feel as a coach that the players, try to do something that you've looked towards before the game, or it's in your playing style, then the player think, well, that's what we're all about. We're going to try that again. And the next time they might try it, it might work, and it might be effective, and you might get a goal from it. So
does that also sort of become entangled with how much you care about maintaining or at least improving? If you can't just maintain, but actually get better at protecting that interpersonal connection that you have with them, because we spoke about the importance of relatedness, and I would think that if a player wants to do well by you because they feel they respect you, and you then criticise their good intent towards trying to operationalise your plan, how is that going to help them want to listen further? Because it doesn't. That's a betrayal, isn't it? That trust.
Totally right, Mark. Yeah, totally right. So it's really important as coaches that we're aware of that, and again, it goes back to consistency. If we are inconsistent in messaging as coaches, it will create, a certain, uncertainty within the playing group, uncertainty within a player. They'll feel, well, what do you actually want from me? They're trying to be loyal. They're trying to do their best for the team, the club, and you're giving them mixed messages, and that's the worst way to, to produce competence in a football team or an individual player. So, so it's very interesting. It is.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to the other thing I wanted to speak about in this space. So we're now into we've moved on from sort of pre-game to now in the midst of the action and how you give feedback. Now, I think what I really enjoyed, and it's a conversation that's been started by sort of previous academics, I think, again, I'm not even the attempt, I think it starts with a C. I think it's Carpenter Carpentier in 2014, and they spoke about the idea of sort of change-orientated, feedback, and is it given in an autonomous, supportive way? And it's always that sort of fight between the sort of what part is salient. Is it informational part where you're actually giving them advice on what they can do, or what they perhaps how they perform to then what they need to do next? You're trying to get that sort of measure right. So what is your experience been of that? And also both in your own experience as a coach, but also in terms of the findings of your study, in terms of the coaches you interviewed?
Well, I think I would actually say one of the strengths as a coach is able to say honest things to players to help them improve in a really good manner, a really good way, on an individual basis. I think players really enjoy hearing what can make them better, what can slightly adapt their game. And as long as you do it, in a tone of voice and a kind of empathy towards them and a care, people can feel that from you. I think it's so important coaching. I think that's what coaching is all about. It's, you're trying to instill, improvement, and, you're trying to make people, help them be great, help them express themselves to be the best possible version of themselves. And to get there, I think there's going to have to be adaptation. You're going to have to give them a little bit negative feedback, but in a way, that appreciates them. There's going to be a reason behind it. You're going to say it in a manner that's maybe slightly softer than harsh, where it would be negative. So I think all these small little details, and from coaches I had as well, I love to hear what could make me better. That was the best thing, that a coach actually took the time to take me aside maybe show me a video clip, but do it in a manner that, says, I really care for you. And if you do this thing here, I think it can really improve you. So I think it's a huge part of our jobs as coaches. And I think as well that you could also, if you manage to balance that with a little bit, maybe it's promotion oriented. I think the word is for it. Something that's done well. I think it's always good to reinforce that. But that can also be controlling, also, you could say. So it's always nice to get that balance between the two.
Yeah, and I think you've landed on it there in terms of the need to get the balance correct, because there's loads of different ways, and you've listed off quite a few of them already, insofar as like try to be empathetic and kind of speak to them at the level first, and then give the feedback. But I suspect no coach is really going to, at all times during a match, be able to have as subtle and as sensitive a conversation about that, and that probably just comes down to the need to have that, what would you maybe call it, a sort of contract of agreement as far as how that conversation is going to take place. If, again, and that in itself is probably quite a rosy painting of things, there's probably just an understanding of what that space is like and understanding the culture. And then, because I don't doubt that at times you're going to be able to give a rationale, and at times you're going to give them opportunities to self-select, but there's going to be times you need to just tell them what to do and when to do it, both for their benefit and for yours and the team. And that must be a difficult part of feeding reality sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's easier to do when you sit them down next to you for a little chat in office, or just look at some video. I think it's always easier. Out on the pitch, you've often not got the time to go so much into reasons behind things, or maybe your coaching style, or my coaching style at least, is very energetic, very much, I'm engaged and I'm on all the time, so it's kind of given in a different manner at times. But I think the players find it, quite fine that, I'm a little bit direct and to the point out of the coaching pitch. And I think as well, it goes back to the direct instruction can be positive, I think. Players expect it. I think there's been a lot of negativity towards it, but I don't think it's so damaging as long as it's done in a manner that's respectful, at least. I think it's not the worst thing in the world. I do agree, though. I think a lot of learning comes through other ways, and there's many beneficial ways. For example, group chats that we have. We've actually experimented with some video work that we take in team sections. For example, maybe you get the midfielders in to look at video clips of individuals actually, and they can bounce things off each other and say, yeah, maybe you could try and do that. Especially peer learning from an experienced pro to a young pro. A guy that's just come from the academy could be a really good learning, and just going through their clips, both individual clips, but both learning from each other to a certain extent. And I think, coaching when it comes from a peer is even more effective at times from their teammates, you know what I mean?
So is this now a conversation maybe around sort of delegation in order to sort of cover more spaces? And again, does that happen in the same way in all places? How does delegation work leading up to a match in order to help sort of foster a sense of competence, and how does it work within a match insofar as perhaps how a coach might delegate or how much to do that at times?
Yeah, well, I've got a really close leaders group, and I think when they're on the pitch, they've got the the autonomy to take things, to slightly adapt things, but we try to use every possible moment maybe to get together a little bit and short messages from the sideline just to discuss things quickly. But I think a really good leadership group is extremely important. We've got a really young team at the moment, and I regularly meet that leadership group to discuss, the training week, how they feel the group is. We've also had group meetings that I'm not involved. I trust the leaders group to take those meetings in the dressing room, and we've actually found that to be more effective than when I'm involved. So the players feel responsibility and accountability themselves, and performances have actually risen from that. And I trust them. I talk first and foremost to the leaders group before they go on and do that, and we discuss a little bit what they're going to talk about. But it's been really positive that they've done that together, and I've only seen positive results from that.
I can imagine that must be beneficial on a couple of different levels, because I can imagine just the fact it's sort of like, I don't know, self-policing, sometimes it doesn't carry good connotations, as it does make it, well, no, it does. There's a certain level of autocracy that you just need to have, and that's just that is the blueprint they need to work to. but just the very fact that I can imagine what a strong collective coordination sort of that we're going to then see if we see everyone shooting in a sort of similar direction, and it's not just you who has to continues to be the preacher of that, and that avoids sort of players like, and I'll be honest, like sometimes we can lose that with the jabs and how much the jabs are felt over time diminishes sometimes and its effectiveness. But the player, the centre half that's in the team, the bid bruisers, the leaders, the technical leaders, all doing the same thing in their own way must help your message be repeated, but in a strong sense.
Absolutely, and I think I've only found it more effective when it comes from the players through experience. But it takes time to grow this environment. I think maybe they've never had this type of environment before. So you've got to develop it. You've got to develop that trust. Players have got to gradually feel more comfortable at taking things in front of each other. But bit by bit, we're getting there. I feel we also do a lot of work where, in between the match sequences, the players get together and they come with their points just in their own team, for example, and I'll stay away from it. Just because I want them to learn from each other, but also want them to learn in a way to take responsibility and not be passive in terms of what they feel inside them. It's very important to get this out and make their opinion known, because I think it grows an individual the more they come out with things and come out with opinion, and that will only make them stronger out on the pitch when the pressure's on, I feel. So I think it's an important way to develop people, first and foremost, is to give space for that opinion and encourage that they come with their own points on how they can improve things.
Yeah, and we kind of just it's reminded me of one of our findings. I think your work that stood out to me was we're talking about how we can't and you can't as a coach, and any coach that's in these sort of high pressure, dynamic, fast moving situations, they can't always afford to take the time to have these conversations with players where at the very least players to be given more clarity, because maybe that helps reinforce the need to follow a message. But one of the things that stood out to me was that players will. One of the coaches, or maybe multiple, you can tell me, but sometimes the players would go along with what the coach says just because they fear not starting the game, and But I would wonder if you're then got a leadership team, and if coaches were to use this, and this, I don't think this matters just in football. This could be any sport. Some coaches that listen to this podcast from lots of different sports, but that's also perhaps a really effective way to give players a space where they can afford to talk back about something within a bubble of it's within their team, it's to their teammates, and maybe someone can be there that can then give a rationale for it, that where it's a less risky conversation for them because they're not speaking to the gaffer, they're not but they're being empowered in an autonomy way, sort of. They're being empowered to ask questions, to get further information, to talk about it openly, to have the perspective heard, even if it's not to you directly, it's to the leadership team. And that's where I really see the utility of that leadership team. That seems really interesting, because am I seeing things that aren't there? Because it does seem like that's came through in your work. Yeah. Also, I see that crossover to your practice.
We experienced a problem in the second match this season, very early on in the season. I said to the guys, okay, we're going to play it from the back. The bench was on the opposite side from the goal. We were playing it from the back, so I couldn't really get my point across to the group. But we continued to play it from the back, even though we'd lost a goal. We were very unsuccessful with it. The captain told the keeper at the time, we're not going to do that anymore. It's not working. We're going to stop it. So he took upon himself, his leadership qualities to say no. But unfortunately, we kept continuing. That message never got across. And then when we evaluated the game the day after, a few players said to me that it was a little bit unclear what they had to do. I said before the game, I'm going to play from the back. But obviously I had to explain to them that they have got a responsibility on the pitch to think for themselves. The leaders on the pitch, when they say not to play from the back, we must listen to the leader on the pitch. We can't just continue such as robots. And that's what the coach said. The coach said to me in an interview, he said, you must be very careful how you make points to the players, because they only want to do the best for you as a coach. So he experienced the same problem against Rosenborg away. He told the goalkeeper the first 10 minutes, I want you to play direct. I want us to take no chances, building them from the back. But unfortunately, he just kept continuing. So it maybe never quite was clear enough when it was the first 10 minutes, but they played far too direct the first 45 minutes. And it took to the half time before he could sort it out. So how we use our language is very important, and it's important that we get a shared understanding. If it doesn't go well, what sort of things can we do? If the ball goes out of play, can we have a quick chat? Could we have used cynically, the keeper often lies down with a problem. That means the keeper's not taken out the pitch. He doesn't have to stay off the pitch. That gives us 2 minutes for a quick chat on the sideline, and that has helped us. And many, many teams now in football are doing these things. So it's a very cynical thing. It's bordering on cheating to a certain extent, but it's something. It's something that's certainly helped us get a more shared understanding of the way forward when it's not going so well.
Well, at least it's a worst kept secret, so we've got an alibi there. We don't need head of them. That's good. So speaking on problems then, because this is one of the ones I've always really this is just one of the reasons why I love having these conversations. I'm so intrigued to kind of learning what I wanted to you to give me a wee bit of clarity on, as you mentioned about the role of providing structure to subs. So the players that aren't starting games, and the coaches spoke a little bit to this. So what was structure and providing structure in those spaces, and what are some of the things and the variables that maybe coaches need to take account of then, with so far as that particular actor, that person who's maybe not starting the matches, in the role they could play?
I think it's very important as coaches that we don't overlook the guys that are not playing. I think often you might, to a certain extent, shape your starting 11 for the week, but what about the substitute that's got to come on in the last 20 minutes when the pressure's on? And does he know exactly what to do? For example, are we clear enough with the guys coming on what their role is when they do come in? Another thing is, I think it's super important, and I learned this from one of the coaches in the study. He said the most important day of the week for him is the day after a match. That's when the substitutes train alone, do a little bit extra, and he's got to be at his best for the substitutes. He's got to be there for them. He's got to make sure he's on the training pitch watching that session, maybe even taking some of it, and making sure that substitutes know that he's doing everything to make they feel as though they're appreciated, and he wants them to develop, and he wants them to stay kind of in the loop, so they're ready to make a difference if there's any injuries, yellow cards, suspensions, what have you. So I think it's super important to create a good environment. That motivational climate thing is to see absolutely everybody within the squad, and maybe actually as a coach give more individual chats to the guys not starting. But that is a thing that's very rare in football. I think even myself, you tend to go to the guys that are starting to talk about things, and I must be even better myself at talking to the younger guys, especially that usually are not starting, that maybe feel that they need that more connection, a little bit insecure, that I give more time to them through the training week.
And can that sometimes be influenced? I always, these sorts of things is exactly why I just think it's the hardest job in the world, and I could only imagine the pressures you have when you're doing your job and any senior coach. But did you mention that even about, one how you can bring yourself to do that, have that conversation more often, but maybe who the best people are for that not to fall on deaf ears. So when you talk about younger players, I could imagine part of why having a conversation with a sub or a younger player is, one, more appealing, but also easier to have, because they take that as a win, because they're happy being in that space where they're just in and around the first team, and they're getting the gaffers talking to them. But then there's a difference between that and the player that was bought recently and they feel they should be starting. So, you need to, I'd imagine, navigate that space, which makes that whole proposition of structure more complicated.
Yeah, it's very difficult, and we've got a couple of guys now that we brought in the summer that are not playing, and I really feel for them. I think I'm very honest with that to players. I don't know if they totally believe me, but I think the most difficult thing as a coach is leaving guys out, especially when you bring them from another country that they've came here to play, and you end up not playing them. You almost feel guilty to a certain extent. So you must keep them involved. But I think the main thing here is you must give them reasons why you're not selecting them. You've got to be honest there. But you've also got to give them one or two things, if they start to improve on, that is going to get them in the team. And that kind of changes the dynamic. And if I as a coach see that they're working on these things in training and they're actually improving on these things, then, I'm going to do everything, to build that player up and, give them a comment and that's brilliant, fantastic. I see that you're trying to get better. And we've got very clever assistants who do a lot of individual work after training as well. And we, identify these areas that players need to improve on. And we really look to the guys that we've brought in, or maybe the more experienced ones, if we can help them with these things, then it keeps them going a bit longer and keeps them motivated that they're actually going in the right direction, that if they do get an opportunity, then they're ready to do the things that we're looking for.
And I can just see it challenging you further as well, because then I'm thinking as the coach, and I've seen it myself, and you get players that haven't been playing well, and we've had a conversation about you want to praise the intent but not criticise the execution, but to a point, and therefore when you've got a sub, normally that's someone who the execution has been faltering so much so that even when you're trying to praise the intent, there is a limit, and therefore there's a whole constant sort of things happening there.
And sometimes you just got to be honest with that. It often comes down to quality, doesn't it? Who starts the matches, and there can be an argument on that, and I think playing style, it's playing style dependent. It's what each coach is looking for, and as a player, suddenly you've got one coach who wants to play a certain way, it really suits you. Then this other guy comes in, plays a little bit different, and it affects everything. So it's a game that's very context, opinion dependent, and can change very, very, very quickly, of course.
But what I think your work and the work that you've from the viewpoints you've been able to collate from the coaches, and also just your own personal opinions and things from your own experience, what I think is so valuable about that is that, to me, the message it lands on is that with certain situations you can't always control if they're going to get better. With a relationship with a sub, but you can control if it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. And I think what you speak to there when you're talking almost about sort of celebrating your subs, and can I come back to this point of what's the groundwork that's needed in order to help structure be better, and that's often that, again, interpersonal involvement, cultivating and maintaining and protecting that sense of relatedness, going into the training session after the game, probably as well. It reminds me, I think there was a basketball coach, John Wooden, who's a famous coach, and he used to always talk about, they wouldn't win any of these championships if it wasn't for the role that the substitutes play in preparing the players during the week. And that was I think that was like a masterclass in somehow synergising structure for players, the starters, with the interpersonal involvement via the celebration of the substitutes. And it's it's just magic. I think that's so important.
Now, I've read a lot of books from these top coaches, John Wooden included, and the one determinant factor I've seen in their success, all the top coaches, is they created a training environment that was harder, more competitive, and a better quality than the opposition would provide at the weekend. And it's that simple, Mark. Honestly, it's that simple. If you can, that's why often the best squads win the league title. It comes through what you do on an everyday basis. Focus on that process and trying to develop each individual and also the playing style to a certain degree that you're better than everyone else, and that's what we're all working towards. So everyone's got the same idea though, so that's what makes it difficult. But it's managing to create that environment where the subs are hungry and they recognise that what they're doing through the training week is helping prepare the guys who start. And if they do get an opportunity, they'll be at a good quality level that they can come in and maybe keep their place as well, because the level that we have in training is better than what the opposition can provide. And often a player can improve in a club without playing so much, and gets a good move just because you've managed to develop the quality so much.
Yeah, and I think one of the points you made as well that I wanted to come back to insofar as so that you can judge a player fairly, it's one thing just throwing a sub into the deep end if you've trained them all week and briefed them and gave them opportunities to also have a sense of competence. But if you haven't included them in drill, and I've made this, and I'm only speaking from youth level here, but I've made this error before sometimes as well. If maybe there's a team that's starting the next day, and you might have your back four who's starting up against the two strikers who are starting, and then it's like the players that aren't are just all of a sudden they play winger, they're a winger, but they've been put at the back just to fill numbers. How are you're not allowing them to be briefed enough on the game plan that you already feel they need to upskill on? So that's a real disservice, and it's disheartening, and then it's, you know, it's not giving that sense of competence, I suppose.
Totally. I'm very wary as well. We sometimes, maybe the second team, as we call it, might play as the opposition we're playing at the weekend. So just say we play a 4-3-3.
I say without any judgment, there's things you need.
They might play a 3-5-2, you know, but I'm very wary, because I've seen coaches do this before, that the whole training week almost, they're playing like a player from the opposition. So you can imagine as an individual how you feel about that. And I've been there as a player myself. I want to play as Kevin Nicol for Mjøndalen, how we play. I want to show the coaches that I can play in the position that I'm designated for better than the guy that's starting. But I end up playing in the opposition team, so you can tell what my motivation's like in that moment, in that training week. You know, it doesn't feel good at all, you know. And you're supposed to play well the weekend, supposed to come in and, you know, do a job for your team. So we've got to be very careful as coaches how we set things up.
Yeah, no, completely. And I suppose what I always want to add this into these conversations, because what we're doing now, and I think it's always with good intentions, is that we can always be better as coaches. But what I always think is, and why I actually think you have quite I like to balance the narrative, and I've seen evidence that I think in your writing as well, because there's also needs to be an appreciation that, see, if coaches were able to do all of these things, like, they would need to be utter geniuses, like, and that's why there's separation of levels in coaching. And I think that's also, I think we need to quite rightly see coaches as performers in their own sense. And when we are, like, let's look at one of the findings that you had mentioned, that one of the coaches I spoke to, where part of why they give a team talk was, and they do a lot of information, is, and it comes back to their own sense of competence. So,
yeah.
I think what always, and I think if we're looking at this, just oftentimes implications of these words is, how does it inform coach education? And I think it would be a disservice to just, you know, just here's a lamp on another pressure for coaches. I think it's always been that coaches need to do what they need to do to manage themselves and feel confident in themselves while they get better enough that they can start to be more critical of themselves. Just like a player, like, the principle of it's the same. I know myself that part of why sometimes in a match I want to speak and I want to talk, it can almost be to remind yourself and convince yourself that you're still able to take control in these moments. There's so much, like, impression management, there's so much pressure, there's so many things that coaches need to do to convince themselves, let alone other people. Like, I always think we need to be fair on coaches in these ways. And it's just your work, I think it was really ripe for having that type of conversation as well.
It's great to say that. And the reason that we published the paper was to help up and coming coaches. You know, it's that was my idea behind it. I think the paper shows, like, a lot of nuance in how a coach must operate, and I think it's the best advice I've always got is to be yourself. You know, I think we've all got our own strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, we can all be better at things, but hopefully we've got really good people around us that can help us. Hopefully the players group can see that we're trying our best, that we care for them. You'll always be, you know, given the benefit of doubt if you are a good person deep down. And there will be moments where we make mistakes, of course, but it's all about, you know, doing our best in each moment and taking every opportunity to learn from other people. And I can only say that I learned so much from taking on this project. You know, it was fantastic to speak not only to the head coaches but the players as well. Gave me so much insight. Obviously I've stopped playing a long time ago, so the modern players maybe a bit different, maybe think differently, so I learned so much from everyone, and yeah, it was a pleasure to do it. So I just hope other coaches can pick up something from it.
Yeah, and I wonder, I mean, I'm quite interested to know your feeling on this, maybe as a last point, Kevin, because we spoke briefly about your, certainly off air, about your sort of academic journey and being a coach and into academia, and how it helped you sort of, it's saying that becoming acquainted with language that helps sort of, and I always see this as a real plus point of, like, academia for coaches, that it helps sort of you organise your thoughts better because there's now a name and a term to assign to a certain thing. But what I always feel, and this is, I think, something that I even implore our academics to think carefully about, is that we have to be mindful that when coaches pick up and use our words, that we can't allow it to become what they strangle themselves by and what they feel paralysed by, because, like, it really does very quick, like, and I don't think there's any reason for why, and it's my own personal opinion, but I don't think there's any reason for why we need to care so much about autonomy support in this really idealistic sense, because even if it could turn into a conversation in semantics, like really if you're getting players to feel in power but they're ultimately going to your blueprint, can you really be autonomy supportive? Like, it's not, what is autonomy? So what's
Even
your
the fact
feeling on
of
that? Because how you maybe want people to use this work and to use theory and frameworks, but to a point sometimes, I think, and then be okay with kind of stretching it a wee bit further.
I think it's a great point you make. I think even the fact that you say as a coach you empower players means that you're still kind of controlling them because you're empowering them, you know. So I think it's almost impossible at a professional level in football that you can be completely autonomy supportive. I actually don't think the players would like a head coach to be that either. So yeah, I think it's very important to have a balanced outlook. I have a great respect for any coaches if they are completely athlete-centred. I think if they manage to do that at, you know, a professional level, I think that's absolutely wonderful, and for worse for them, that's fantastic. I still don't think we're there in a football environment to do that completely. I do believe there are sports that are better at it than football. I think rugby, from what I've heard, there's a lot of very clever people in that, you know, in that sport and how they do things. And I've read a lot about the All Blacks, how they don't do any team talks, how they leave it for the players to make decisions. But I really believe that you cannot have a successful team in sport at the very highest level without a certain amount of structure, how they're going to play, and strict guidelines on that as well, that there is certain things, certain principles that is of the utmost importance that each player will abide by to a certain extent, and that could be seen as a little bit controlling. So it's important to have a balanced outlook on everything that we say and do.
And I suppose it even comes back to I think one of the things you mentioned at the start is about coaches. Good coaches are able to explain things in as simple terms as they can do. This is, again, and I sound like I'm going on a rant here, but it's very difficult sometimes to differentiate structure from control, even from someone who studies it a lot. And the very fact that it requires such a thing, you know, fine-tooth comb or whatever you want to call it, to help recognise the separation of those things, maybe we shouldn't get too caught up in the separation to some extent insofar as how we operationalise that, because in writing it sounds it's a very difficult conversation for you to actually to communicate, and that, I think, tells you that there needs to be a more organic feel about the whole thing then, because if they're constantly in both sides of the fence and there's small separation, that tells you something.
I think it would almost paralyse you as a coach if you have to almost overthink every single discussion, every single little bit of feedback you give, you know. My best advice have to be, you know, it's got to come from the right place. I think as long as it comes from the right place within your heart, I know it might be a little bit, how can I say, a little bit not quite objective enough, but I do believe that, you know, there's a certain amount of kindness involved in coaching, caring involved in coaching. There's been a little bit of research on as well, and this will lead you more towards that autonomy, involvement, positive structure, for example, that you need as a coach to be effective and successful. But I'm sure even the top coaches are very controlling at times.
But it's that word you said, it's kindness, and if you're very, in some sense, it's a paradox, because of even interpersonal theory that's designed to help support relationships, if you're too dogmatic on doing it, you are missing the person in order to conform to the theory. And that's it, isn't it? It's you need to know the person, and your work spoke to that quite highly, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark.
No, excellent. I think we've covered everything I wanted to ask you about. I don't know, and again, this is a sort of a platform for you, Kevin, as well, but is there anything that we haven't covered that you would like to maybe discuss in the work, or anything connected around it?
Not really, Mark. I think the main thing I take from it was the surprising fact of how much involvement I had to play. I think we've already went over that quite a bit. And I think the players, going back to what I said previously, is we cannot see the players enough. We cannot connect with them enough. We cannot make them feel safe enough. And if we do that, if we connect with them, then they will do anything for you almost. They will accept the strongest of demands. They will accept, often at times, you might be strong with them. But once that connection is in place, they will believe in you, they will trust you, and they will they will, like I say, do anything they can to help the team be successful and themselves.
Yeah, excellent. No, thanks so much, Kevin. I'm doing my best here to kind of summarise some of the things that we spoke to there, because we have, as you've kind of alluded to there already, we spoke about structure, and I think understanding structure in a contextualised way, not just structure sort of universally, but structure within a specific sport, within a specific category of sport, within a specific medium in terms of this is looking more at tactics and structure. Structure can mean different things in different spaces at different times. We've also now sort of understood, and I think correctly, sort of reprioritised it, and not in a way that is still putting barriers up to this idea of directive control, as if that can't join the party. It's part of it, and players need that at different times. And you spoke already about the need to have trust in the relationship that you've designed with the players, to actually stick to that, and also, I suppose, in their needs, work to the players' needs, and if they want directness, then we do that. We spoke to how the fact that we need to sort of underpin and set up structured environments through interpersonal involvement, through relatedness support, and then we've kind of touched on some little tips and wee coach hats that you can do, in pre-game, mid-game, after-game. We'll spoke about leadership groups. We'll spoke about sticking to your rules, sticking to your philosophy. Don't change things straight. Don't be haphazardous where things move about all the time. We spoke about the substitute and actually seeing them as their own sort of entity, but celebrate them. Don't see that's wrong. Don't see them as an entity; they're part of the team, but celebrate them and also brief them, structure their environment for them. And then I suppose this is all sort of amalgamated into a conversation that is actually maybe driving it back against the semantics of coaching literature that sometimes, without meaning to, it can help a lot, but we should use it and form a practice with it, but don't feel at ransom to the theory as such, just coaching won't allow for that. So unless I've missed anything there.
Fantastic summary, Mark. That's wonderful.
Right. Yeah. No, Kevin, thanks so much. It's been excellent having you on. And yeah, just thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure, Mark. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, and I hope that the conversation was as interesting to those that were listening as it has been for me having this conversation with Kevin. So thanks so much, Kevin, and I will see everyone next time.